Good morning, students. Today we will talk about attitude measurement. Attitude measurement is something which is very important while designing questionnaire for the study, or say while selecting questions for the study to be asked from the respondents. Sometimes we go for some questions like they have a reply like yes or no. Sometimes it would be like we might be asking them to rate a question on the basis of, or rate a person on the basis of 1 to 10. We might ask them to rate an object or a company, like that. Or sometimes we just ask them a question and we tell them that you have to answer it in your own words, right? So many kind of questions are there while designing a questionnaire, which is actually our next video. So before starting to design a questionnaire, we need to study how to measure attitudes. So it is an enduring disposition to consistently respond in a given manner. As hypothetical constructs, the hypothetical construct is used to describe a variable that is not directly observable but is measurable by an indirect means such as verbal expression or overt behavior. Attitudes are also considered as such variables. When we need to observe someone's attitude regarding something, most of the times we say that it is either optimistic or passive behavior, passive attitude, positive attitude, negative attitude. We always talk in terms of them. It is not like that we actually get a figure from them that yes, that person is 9% having 9% attitude, 10% positive attitude, or 0% attitude. Nothing like that is there, right? So that is why we need basic scaling to measure attitudes, so as to define them in our own ways, so as to make it easier to measure attitudes. Three components, major components of attitude are: one is affective, then cognitive, and behavioral. Affective attitude is the feelings or emotions towards an object. When you try to show your feelings about something, about someone, that is your affective behavior, affective part of attitude. Cognitive part is your knowledge and belief about something. That something can be a person, object, or a company, or anything, right? Then behavioral aspect is predisposition to action and your intentions. Then behavioral expectations. You might be having some behavioral expectations from the other person as well. So these three things combine your behavioral attitude regarding something. Then how should we select a measurement scale? We have defined these three parts of attitude because we are going to use these things throughout the PPT. We are going to use our knowledge and beliefs in one way. We are going to use our feelings and emotions in one way to answer some scaling techniques, right? And we are going to use our behavioral expectations, our intentions also, along with scaling measurement. So that is why we have divided attitude in the three parts. Then how would we select a measurement scale? What is the best scale? Can you directly tell me that what is the best scale? No, it depends on the study. For example, it depends on manager's problem definition, what kind of the problem you have in your hand, or you can say what kind of the research study you are going to do, and its backward and forward linkages to other choices. Backward and forward linkages we studied in at the time of research process. We studied that what kind of the backward and forward linkages the whole process has got, right? So on that basis also we will be deciding which is the kind of scale we are going to measure one particular attitude. Measuring attitudes. This can be measured through either ranking, or maybe rating, or maybe sorting, or choosing. Ranking basically is rank order preferences. It is like an ordinal scale. You will be ranking, you will be providing your preferences over the other things. Then rating estimates magnitudes of a characteristic. You will be basically providing, it's like you are trying to provide, how much you approve one particular thing out of, totality. For example, you might ask a person to rate something on the scale of 10. So if you get marks like 8 or 9, that means it's up to, at least the on the higher side, like yes, you have defined the attitude, or maybe you are on the positive side, you can say. Then sorting, arrange or classify concepts. Sometimes we try to arrange things in a manner, from totally disagreeing to something or totally agreeing to something. So that is a kind of sorting. You are trying to sort out the things. Sometimes you can even call it as, for example, you have got four choices in your hand, and you might sort them on the basis of your choice, and rank them like 1, 2, 3, 4. Or you might classify them as per, one basket is economical, one is actually fresh, one basket is like having very good fruits, or the fruits liked by you. This way you can actually sort the things. Then choice, selection of preferred alternative. You are finally choosing one alternative among all the choices available. So, for example, you have got 3 choices available and you are choosing one among them. That is basically choosing something out of them. So these four are going to be used in almost all the scaling methods. Ranking, for example, a paired comparison, a measurement technique that presents respondent with 2 objects and asks to pick the preferred one. That is basically a ranking. Or you might rank things in order like this: 1, 2, and 3. This is also a kind of ranking. Ranking tasks require that the respondent rank order a small number of objects in overall performance on the basis of some characteristics or stimulus. Then rating. Rating asks the respondent to estimate the magnitude of a characteristic or quality that an object possesses. For example, you might ask a person to rate something or somebody on the scale of 10, or on the scale of 20, or on the scale of 100, and the marks you are getting is actually the magnitude of that particular characteristic with you. The respondent's position on a scale is where he or she would rate an object. Then sorting. It might present the respondent with several concepts typed on cards and require that the respondent arrange the cards into a number of piles or otherwise classify the concept. For example, you have got 4 kind of cards, you have got a pile of cards, and you might sort them on the basis of number, like blue cards in one row, white cards in one row, black cards in one row, and green cards separately. So this is also a kind of sorting. Or you might be asked that you have to separate them accordingly, like you have seen this particular picture on the card before, or you have not seen this before. So you can also sort them in 2 ways, this way, like you have seen it or you have not seen it. Then choices between 2 or more alternatives is another type of attitude measurement. It is assumed that chosen object is preferred over the other, or you can say chosen object is actually given highest ranking among all. Physiological measures of attitude provides a means of measuring attitudes without verbally questioning the respondent. We have done these physiological measures in unit 2. For example, galvanic skin responses or measure blood pressures. These are also kind of attitude we need to measure sometimes for some social sciences studies as well. And in case of medical studies, yes, these are very common. Yes, here we start with actual scaling process with all the scales. Number 1, simple attitude scaling. How would you measure the scale in simplest possible way? In its most basic form, attitude scaling requires that an individual agree with a statement or respond to a single question. This type of self-rating scale merely classifies respondents into 1 or 2 categories. For example, The president should run for re-election. Agree or disagree? This is the basic scaling example. Then category scales. You can even define scales categorically. For example, category scale is a more sensitive measure than a scale having only 2 response categories. It provides more information. In the previous scale, we just had 2 categories, agree or disagree. You can even have an option like can't say. You might not know something about it, or you might be confused about being agreed or being disagreed. So that should also be provided along with this, right? But here it is, we will always have a few questions like this also: agree or disagree, yes or no, good or bad, right? So this is one of those kind of questions. This is simplified scaling example. Then category scales is, for example, questions working is an extremely important factor in the usefulness of these scales. Let us have a look at one example. How important were the following in your decision to visit San Diego? Check one for each item. Like you are visiting a country. When you visited the country, what are the factors you actually considered, right? Or up to what extent you actually considered those factors? For example, climate. Whether climate consideration, do you think whether climate consideration was important or not? Yes, you can say very important, because when you are visiting the country, you really need to check what would be the climate, so as to pack your clothes accordingly, pack other material accordingly, right? So you can actually check, very important, and it depends on person to person preferences. Then cost of travel, yes, if I earn very good, then I might not feel it important. That might be not too important. But maybe if I'm earning not much, but I want to travel to the country, then I will be checking it, and it would be very important for me. So, and for some people it is somewhat important, not much important, as per or say as in to compare with other parameters. So they can even mention somewhat important. For example, family oriented, whether the country is family oriented or not. Educational, historical aspects of the country. Then familiarity with the area, whether you are familiar with the area or not, right? So how would you rate this? This is actually the category scale. This is like, it's not when we were talking about simplified scaling, we could have provided the options just important and not important, right? But we have introduced one more category here, that is somewhat important, that is in between the two options. Then method of summated ratings, like the Likert scale. This is the famous scale used by maximum researchers, especially when research is conducted academically. An extremely popular means for measuring attitudes. Yes, it is. Then respondents indicate their own attitudes by checking how strongly they agree or disagree with statements. For example, response alternatives are like this: strongly agree, agree, uncertain, disagree, and strongly disagree. Or sometimes we even provide the points for these ones, like 1 for strongly disagree and 5 for strongly agree. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 this way, right? For example, it is more fun to play a tough competitive tennis match than to play an easy one. What would you say? Is it really more fun to play a tough match or the easy one? So you have to check one thing out, one particular scale out of these 5. Or there is really no such thing as a tennis stroke that can be mastered. Again, 5 options are there: whether you strongly agree to this, whether you strongly disagree to this, or you are not sure about it, or maybe you are neutral about the concept, or you are agreeing but not 100%, you disagree but not 100%. Like this, you will have to answer to the question. You have to check one box out of these 5. Or playing tennis is a great way to exercise. Most of the people would greatly strongly agree to this. Yes, it is. Or some people might just agree to this. Then semantic differential scale. What do you mean by semantic differential? We are talking about differentials here, right? But how? A series of 7-point bipolar rating scales, bipolar adjectives such as good and bad, anchor both ends or poles of the scale. For example, a weight is assigned to each position on the rating scale. Traditionally, scores are either like this 7 to 1, or maybe like this +2 plus 3 +2 +1 0 -1 -2 -3. This is like 0 for neutral, 3 for most negative answer, and -3 for most negative comment, and +3 for most positive. And in the same way, when you go for 1 to 7 scale, 7 is for most positive, that means good, and 1 is for bad or say most negative, and 4 is for neutral. Let's see this also with the help of an example. Like you can say that exciting and calm, whether you are excited about something or calm, these are the opposite, right? The same way you will always be writing opposites on both the poles, or maybe you are interesting or dull, or maybe you are neutral, simple and complex, passive and active. As per the question, you can use these terminologies. Then there are numerical scales. When we were talking about Likert scale, we were not actually talking about numerical scales. We were just normally talking about a scale. When it is about numerical scales, we are just numerically we are using numbers while considering the scales. Numerical scales have numbers as response options rather than semantic space or verbal descriptions. It would not be having semantic space like in this particular scaling, or it won't even be having verbal descriptions like we had in Likert scale to identify categories or say response positions. First numerical scale is our Staple scale. Modern versions of Staple scale place a single adjective as a substitute for the semantic differential when it is difficult to create pairs of bipolar objectives. It is almost same as semantic scale, but in different way. The advantage and disadvantage of this particular scale are almost same as semantic differential. Like this, for example, you talk about a store name, whether it is actually suiting the store's image or not. If you feel like that yes, it is the most appropriate one, then you will be choosing +3. If you feel like it is not appropriate one, then you will be going towards the negative side. Like if you feel like that it is the most inappropriate one, then you will be choosing -3. Or maybe if you don't know anything about it, you are not able to decide, then you can choose +1 or -1. These are more towards neutral, like this. Right, select a plus number for words that you think describe the store accurately, or select a minus number for words you think do not describe the store accurately. And up to what minus or up to what plus you will be going, you can decide that as per how much the name actually describes the store. Then behavioral differential. The behavioral differential instrument has been developed for measuring the behavioral intentions of subjects towards any object or category of objects. The description of the object to be judged is placed on the top of a sheet, and the subjects indicate that their behavioral intention toward the object on a series of scale. For example, a 25-year-old women sales representative would or would not ask this person for advice, and you are not 100% sure whether it is a would or it is a would not. So you might choose as per your convenience, like how much sure you are. If you are 100% sure that this would ask this person for advice, then you will be choosing this particular option. If you're 100% sure of would not, then you go with this option. Or if you are somewhere in between, you might choose either 5 of these scales. Paired comparisons. In paired comparisons, the respondents are presented with 2 objects at a time and asked to pick the one they prefer. For example, ranking objects with respect to one attribute is not difficult if only a few are compared. But as the number of items increases, the number of comparisons increases geometrically. Yes, it happens. If you have got just 2 objects to compare within, then you will be able to do it very easily and very fastly. But if you have 10 objects in hand to compare, then it would take little more time to compare them. If the number of comparisons is too great, respondents may fatigue and no longer carefully discriminate among them. So it would not be of any use then. So that is why comparisons should be shorter. For example, divide 100 points among each of the following brands according to your preference for brand. Brand A, brand B, brand C. It's easier. But if you have got 10 brands where you have to decide about the points, in fact, you will be confused like how to choose and which one to choose. So it is always advisable to choose little less preferences when it comes to behavioral patterns. Then graphic rating scales. These are good scales, but very less used in academic researches. These are used when you have to influence the respondent. You have to, let them come out of the board environment they are having at the time of interview. For example, like this, you can, write a question and then ask them, it's very good, it's neutral, or very poor. Good, neutral, poor. And in the same way, happy, sad, and neutral, you can show things like this. You can have different kind of smileys. You can have more smileys just to show the expression, like smiling and sad, and then beach mein neutral. You can use that. Then monadic rating scale. These ask about a single concept. Now, for example, now that you have had your automobile for about 1 year, please tell us how satisfied you are with its engine and power pickup. That's it. You will be answering among these 5. This is a kind of Likert scale as well, because but here we are talking about just rating about one question. So we will not be using Likert scale in such cases. Likert scale generally is used when you have list of questions. For example, you have got 10 questions and you will be listing that from 1 to 5 as on Likert scale, agree or disagree. You'll be having numerous questions. You will be typing Likert scale just once and you'll be asking respondents to respond accordingly. But here, for example, we have just one question of this kind where we have to ask such opinion, then we will be using monadic rating scale. For example, whether you are completely satisfied, very satisfied, fairly well satisfied, somewhat dissatisfied, or very dissatisfied, like this. Then comparative rating scale. It asks respondents to rate a concept by comparing it with a benchmark. For example, you might decide a benchmark for the people, and you might ask them to rate another company on the basis of that benchmark. For example, please indicate how the amount of authority in your present position compares with the amount of authority that would be ideal for this position. You can compare your own position with the ideal position. This is also a kind of benchmarking. Too much, about right, or too little. Then unbalanced scale. Balanced scale rating scale is having equal number of positive and negative categories, and neutral point is at the center. For example, we discussed an example in semantic scales, right? But when it comes to unbalanced scale, it has more responses distributed at one end of the scale, like this. How satisfied are you with the bookstore in the student union? One side it would be satisfied, and another one it is very dissatisfied. But you have 2 more options: quite satisfied and neither satisfied, no dissatisfied. You have the kind of scattered scale. You could have just 4 things in here, but with some basic scales like Likert scale or semantic differential scale. But no, we have chosen things in a distorted manner. This is actually the unbalanced scale. But instead of this, if we have we would have chosen scale like this: very satisfied, then satisfied, neutral, dissatisfied, and very dissatisfied. It was a balanced scale. Forced or non-forced choice scale. Forced choice scale means that respondent has to choose one of the fixed alternatives. Non-forced is something like respondent have an option to choose can't say. Right? We generally don't provide such options, because we know that if we provide such options to the respondents, they will always go with can't say, and can't say, right? So that is why we generally go for forced choice scales. But if it is being provided and we expect subjects to respond properly, then it helps investigator to separate respondents who cannot make an honest comparison. That's it. Now let us discuss some true false. Number one, a person's attitude toward Tide detergent can be directly observed. Is it? No, you cannot actually, observe the attitudes. Attitudes are latent or hypothetical constructs, and because of this, they are not actually directly observable. We have discussed this in the very starting that these are actually hypothetical. Then attitudes are thought to have three components: affective, cognitive, and behavioral. Is it? Yes. Person's knowledge about a brand is part of the affective component of that person's attitude toward that brand. Is it? It is the cognitive component represents person's awareness and knowledge. Affective represents your feelings. So when it comes to person's knowledge, we are talking about cognitive component of attitude. So it is false. Researchers face a wide variety of choices in measuring attitudinal concepts. Yes, they have actually wide variety of choices. We have discussed them in detail just now. So it is true. Ranking asks the respondents to estimate the magnitude or the extent to which some characteristic exists. Is it? Rating does that. Ranking doesn't do that. Rating asks the respondent to estimate the magnitude, whereas ranking just orders them in preferred order. Some questions. Define attitude and explain why it is considered a hypothetical construct. Though we have discussed, attitude is a social physiological consent that can be defined as a relatively enduring predisposition to respond consistently to various things, including people, activities, events, or objects. How attitudes cannot be directly observed. Someone may have an attitude towards something, but we cannot actually see this attitude. So because we can't see because we can't directly see these phenomena, they are known as latent constructs, and that is why we call them as hypothetical constructs or just simply the constructs. But we hypothetically consider them in the other way, and then we try to prove it. Compare and contrast a Likert scale with a semantic differential scale. Yes, Likert scale, we discussed Likert scale. It was like about, it indicates their attitudes by checking how strongly or how strongly they agree or disagree, right? With carefully constructed statements like strongly disagree, strongly agree, disagree, agree, and neutral. That's that way. But when it comes to semantic differential scale, you do not have to mention all the statements. You can just mention good and bad on two sides, and then you can provide the scales. Or for example, you can provide modern and old fashioned, and you can provide the scales in between. So this is basically the difference between the two. In Likert scale, we have provided, we have actually provided, we have actually indicated that how your attitude differs from strongly agree to strongly disagree. We have mentioned the things, right? We have actually mentioned whether you are strongly agreeing, whether you are strongly disagreeing, or you are neutral. But in case of semantic differential, you will be pointing to extreme things, to opposite words, for example good and bad, and then you will be showing that with the spaces. Then describe a constant sum scale and discuss when a researcher might use this type of scale. Constant sum scale demands that respondent divide points among several attributes to indicate their relative importance. For example, we discussed to distribute 100 points among brand A, B, and C as per their preferences. Then next is explain how a researcher uses the paired comparison method and determine the number of paired comparisons necessary to compare 4 brands. Paired comparison is a measurement technique that involves presenting the respondent with 2 objects and asking the respondent to pick the preferred objects. More than 2 objects may be presented, but comparisons are made in pairs then. If a researcher wishes to compare 4 brands, 6 comparisons will be necessary. We are applying probability here. Then fifth is define forced choice rating scale and explain the advantage of using a non-forced choice scale. You have to define forced choice rating scale, and advantage of non-forced choice scale is that you will be actually getting the right feedback from the respondent, but this has its disadvantage as well, as we just discussed in the last slide. That's it. Thank you. In next video, we will be discussing how to design a questionnaire.